Hey, everybody. Welcome back. It's SIC Talks number 96. I'm here with Sean Monahan, dialing in live and direct from Los Angeles. Sean is a trend forecaster and a writer, and one of my favorite, dare I say, oracles in terms of the tone and tenor of the zeitgeist. He publishes a newsletter called 8 Ball, which is again one of my favorites and really gets into some of the bigger issues. In it, Sean has done things such as propose recently that there's no such thing as Gen Z, propose that we are entering into an era of sort of magic and spells, and then famously a couple of years ago coined the term the vibe shift, which New York Magazine then picked up on and turned into its big famous story. Okay, sorry, enough intro. Sean, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
It's warm.
Was it warm there? Okay.
It is warm.
Los Angeles finally fulfilling its promise
Mm-hmm.
to be warm. Well, that brings me to a place that I wanted to start. You grew up not far from where I'm from. I'm from Syracuse. You're from Geneva, right? Is that right? It's
true. I feel like more people probably know Syracuse than Geneva, which is a pretty small college town. But they're close.
Yeah, and Geneva, sorry, which college is Geneva?
Hobart and William Smith.
Got it.
So it's the colleges colloquially, because it used to be a men's college and a women's college that merged, I think, in the 60s, maybe.
Right. Yeah. That was it. It was decolonialization in Africa and the merging of male.
Yeah, I mean, upstate New York has a lot of women's colleges.
Well,
Seneca Falls is between us.
Yeah, I was gonna. I mean, speaking of that, we just had Wells just closed.
Oh,
recently.
Did it?
Yeah,
that sucks. I had some high school friends that went there.
Yeah. Well, okay. So in any case, not to get into the minutia of higher education in upstate New York, but the reason that I think it's interesting is that I have been thinking about in the last year or so the idea that coming from that part of the country, because of the lake effect weather patterns and the total changeability of the climate, pre-inclines those of us who grew up in that region to be maybe slightly more circumspect about change, and also to be a little bit more cognizant of the fact that things are constantly changing. And
seasons really change there.
They really, not only do they change across seasons, they change literally across days, right? I'm going to help a friend organize a show at the Everson Museum this summer, and I'm just thinking part of what he wants to do is outside, and I'm just like, well, Everson in June, what's the weather going to be? It could, without exaggeration, it could snow.
I mean, it hasn't done that in a while, but I did go to a wedding in October where it was my cousin's wedding, and I felt really bad. It was outdoors. And as we're driving to the venue, there's just one really dark cloud moving through the sky that just rained during the ceremony and then stopped.
And, you just know.
It was a beautiful fall day otherwise, but just 30 minutes during the ceremony it rained. But where I live is a little bit below the lake effect. I mean, I'm very well versed in it. I mean, we got a lot of snow this year, but Syracuse really gets dumped on.
Yeah.
You guys are I think the snowiest city south of Alaska.
Snowiest. No, I think even more so than Alaska. Actually, the snowiest city.
The whole city, or the whole country.
Of that size. There are places that are much snowier, but the city of that size. Well, okay, so not to dwell upon that, but it brings me to the sort of underlying question, which is you as an augur of trends and the zeitgeist, the gestalt. Do you feel like you were naturally inclined from an early age to do that because of the environment you came from, or did you sort of learn to do it in an academic fashion?
Oh, I did not learn how to do anything. I mean, it started out as a joke. It started out as a joke, because my background is I went to art school, and I was working collaboratively with some peers, and we thought it would be really funny to start a trend forecasting group. I think is what we called it.
This is K-Hole. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, but that was just kind of we found a cache of corporate documents, and this is back in 2010, 2011, when I think trend forecasting as an industry was a bit more flush because, one, there wasn't social media, which you can kind of like fake outsource thinking like this to social media. Like, just hire some young people who are online and they can tell us what's happening. Or you can like outsource it to social media listening companies, social listening companies like Crimson Hexagon or something like that. And also you could like charge people a lot more.
Sure. Yeah.
So there were a lot of like really kind of crappy PDFs that people were charging lots of money for, and we thought, oh, we could do this. And then, I mean, I think the way I think about it though is like kind of like more of a literary competency, you know.
Talk about that.
Flannery. Well, I am like very hard and fast that like I don't really have a methodology. The methodology is like you get up, you go in the world, and you're attentive to it, which is actually hard to do. I think especially now because so many people are really engrossed in their phones, and that's something I struggle with as well. But actually being able to like look up, look around you, identify patterns, and then have a gut instinct about what has the potential to move from like a niche subculture to a mass market. Because I think that's ultimately what people are interested in, right? There's lots of like small, interesting things happening in the world, but they want to know which thing kind of portends a bigger cultural change. I mean, that's what the vibe shift was. And at K-Hole, when we did Normcore, to me, that they really feel like bookends for the decade in some ways. Whereas like Normcore is like kind of the death of hipsterdom. And the vibe shift is, in some ways, it's rebirth. I think some people forget that hipsterdom was like very edgy, you know? Gavin McInnes is like a right-wing figure. And that wasn't very explicit in the 2000s, but it was definitely present, you know? It was like a post-political correctness political moment, or a cultural moment, you know? So people were being like which ironically offensive all the time.
Right. Which we seem to be, you know,
re-entering,
fully back into. Yeah, fully returned to now.
I mean, there's a pretty clear. It's also like there's like clear cycles. Like you were saying, the weather is unpredictable in upstate New York, but it's not that unpredictable. You know, winter is coming, and you know that there's, you know, but it's true though. Like it's very cold in the winter. It's very nice in the summer. There's a general pendulum swing. The details get a bit fuzzy, but overall, you have a strong expectation for when you need, you know, snow boots and when you can go sailing.
Yeah, well, it is interesting, right? If you think about it as a pendulum, like this quote, you can never clock a pendulum at, you know, its lowest point because it's constantly in motion.
Yeah,
has popped up a bunch recently in my world. I don't know why exactly, but it like the notion that we are in constantly in a giant pendulum swing between poles, and it's the job of the trend forecaster to a certain degree is tracking where we are along that trajectory without necessarily having to name like bing 6 o'clock this microsecond whatever.
Well, it's a general instinct for like when things are going to cross over. I talk about this sometimes with people. I think there's a real tendency to say like culture's moving faster than ever. Like this is kind of the constant refrain that you hear. I don't fully agree with that. I think like there's a lot more minutia happening, but there's a bit about missing the forest for the trees element to that because people are hyper fixated on like what's on the TikTok trending board. But actually, I think things take about 5 years to go from like a subculture to mass adoption.
Interesting.
And that 5 year cycle feels pretty close. Like the vibe shift thing, like
consistent over time. That 5 year.
Yeah, I mean, this is based on, I think vibe shift and normcore were big enough that you can like kind of see a real mass adoption of those. And when they first come out, like, well, like both of those things are things that I wrote before they were picked up by New York Magazine. So there's like a kind of 6 month, 8 month lag between like me first identifying something, it going to the press, and then it goes to the press. And then everyone says, this doesn't make any sense. I hate it. It's annoying. It doesn't make any... I don't understand it. I mean, I actually think it's kind of funny because both those words, now that people are familiar with them, are kind of self-explanatory. You know? I don't think they're that confusing. But it's kind of just the novelty shock of it in the beginning. And then, like, as you see kind of right now, I wrote the vibe shift thing, you know, in 2021, so we're closing in on 4 years later.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of entered like a very mass vernacular. I still wouldn't say full saturation, you know, but I think when you have Elon Musk saying it, you know, it's kind of it's found its way somewhere. And the other interesting thing is then other people think like there's this kind of weird way that people encounter things and forget they encountered it, and then they think that they came up with it.
Of course.
Which is, I'm not trying to like complain here because I think there's like kind of chasing people around being like, I did that is tedious. But it was funny to watch kind of Silicon Valley take it up, and then I'm not gonna like name drop someone because it's the point isn't really to condescend anyone.
Sorry, you mean Silicon Valley, the community, not Silicon Valley,
show. Like you saw it have a second viral moment on Twitter in like late 2023, which is how it transited to Elon Musk, I'm sure. And someone who wrote about it, people were like pointing out, like, you know, someone else actually said that already. And it's also funny because Silicon Valley like doesn't look at traditional media, so so it goes through the traditional media cycle. The people on Twitter, X, unaware, but then this person who wrote about it said it appeared to him in a dream, which is really funny. Which to me. I mean, it's probably kind of true, but this is how things work. Is that people see things and then you forget about it. Me too, probably. You know what I mean? I've definitely thought that I'd written about things that I thought were organic to me, and then realized that I was, you know, picking up on something else that pre-existed.
Yeah. Well, you. I mean, certainly to your point, and you've said the phrase already, but it's like the pattern recognition that is involved in discerning these macro movements and just generally like that are involved in your inputs. That's got to be a huge part of what you're doing, and none of it, probably not most of that is happening like at a surface level. It's sort of like, you know,
it's literally me walking around in the world, you know, like I actually remember when I started in New York and LA. Yeah, exactly.
I don't believe you.
I mean, people hate to hear that, but I mean, some of that is that creative people live in these cities. Like, it's just really hard to work in lots of creative industries and not be in these places, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you want to work in the art world, if you want to work in the fashion world, if you want to be a creative director for a famous pop star, like, you have to live in one of these places. So there's like a selection effect there. Yeah, and these are the people who are trying new things. And I mean, frankly, you know, 95% of it doesn't work. That's how it goes. It is a bit like startup ecosystems or something, but their behaviors and cultural objects and aesthetics and things like that. And you see people doing stuff. Like I remember, like I wrote for The Guardian kind of a year after everyone was talking about it in 2022. And I have a very distinct memory of seeing these people who I now know. They live in Los Angeles. They're a band called The Help, like walking around in, you know, flared skinny jeans and trucker hats and like skinny little scarves. I didn't know who they were at the time. I would see them walking around like Rivington or something, and I was like, you know, that's interesting. This is very much like a rehashing of like the garage rock revival and the, you know, early 2000s aesthetics.
Right, I was going to say circa 2004 or 5.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe even a little earlier, but and like, so you see those people, and then you start noticing that like, oh, there's all these other young men walking around the East Village also wearing trucker hats. And I mean, this is kind of like like, you know, in trend forecasting you call it like a signal, right? Like a very specific small thing. But then it kind of alludes to a larger moment. And I think like the other element of being able to anticipate things is like, and this is when I say it's more literary, is kind of having a mental model of what people are like and what people want and why people do things.
Interesting. Okay, sure.
Because on the one hand, of course, there's like the generic pendulum swing that's generational. You know, hipster culture was kind of the tail end of Gen X and the front end of millennials, and then it really got just like totally abandoned quite quickly around like 2012, 2013. You know, all the like neo-Victorian like selvage denim
No, careful, Sean. You're treading close to my territory.
But it just like it just came in it. There was a big transition where all of a sudden you just didn't really see that stuff quite quickly. And so
well, okay. So can I stop you there for a second? Because I have to say, like, and not to dwell on normcore right a decade ago, but like when I read that report, I was just like, this is nonsense. I was in the hate.
Like, nonsense.
This is nonsense, because who would want to appear as being more generic? Like we're moving in a world where personal brand matters more, and like, who would want to seem more generic? And of course, I didn't grasp the other macro forces that were happening because they weren't pertinent to me.
Well, this is where the kind of psychological element comes in.
Yeah, well, but here, and actually, my question sort of gets to that. The report that followed that, and which has an analog in Potions and Magic, or Magic and Potions, whatever it was he published last week. Was chaos theory, and chaos theory was probably 2015
chaos
or
magic.
So, and it was chaos magic. Excuse me, sorry. Chaos magic. And it was, broadly speaking, and correct me if I get any of the nuance wrong here, but it's the idea that essentially, like, The Secret or whatever, that you can sort of manifest a reality by thinking about it and believing in it and so on and so forth. And obviously the election of that also seemed like bullshit until Donald Trump got elected. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute.
And he's famously someone who does, like positive, like he's talked about like reading these books about thinking positively, and I don't think he uses kind of the woo-woo words of manifesting, because also chaos magic has like these kind of occult references, but generally it's about thinking that you can kind of trick, like this is kind of like the more secular version of it, that you can think about something really hard and forget it, and then you can kind of trick yourself into manifesting it by acting a certain way in the world.
Sure.
Which I think is actually pretty true. Like, you can not realize that like your overt negativity is maybe driving people and opportunities away, and kind of fooling yourself into being happier and more optimistic does actually kind of open doors, but you can't kind of see it because it's all these like micro gestures and micro expressions and like tones that you're using that are like all kind of subconscious.
Yeah, well, the underlying question is, to what extent you feel like you were able to, or are able to now, or will be able to in the future, like manifest the predictions that you're making as a forecaster.
Yeah, well, I think there's a funny thing that the more like kind of viral hit trends you have, the more fuzzy it gets whether or not you're making things happen or predicting things, because people put more weight on those predictions.
Yeah, sure.
And there is a version of forecasting that is more explicitly this, especially like kind of color forecasting that Pantone does. Like there is like a secret cabal of people that meet up in Florence every year and say like, these are the colors we're going to use. And there's like a very materialist element to this, because they're manufacturers and they can only make so many things.
Right.
And they also only have so many things to offer. So like it's like why you can't buy an avocado fridge anymore, right? They don't make them.
No, I
just mean like in the 70s, this was like a famous kind of color fridge.
This is a fridge that's the color of an avocado, not literally a fridge for avocados, which would
No, it's just like there was a lot of like avocado green stuff in the 70s, and you can't buy that anymore because manufacturers don't make it. So like there's an element of like it feels like there's infinite things in the world, but there are actually a limited number of them, even if there's a lot of them. And with the kind of color forecasting stuff, like when Pantone says we're going in this direction, a lot of manufacturers and people who make garments will kind of, be like, okay, like that, we have our marching orders. And so that very much is like a clear example of forecasting as, enacting something because you have some kind of market position that can direct things.
Okay, so I guess, and sorry, one interesting corollary to me that I just thought of was like there are a finite number of things that can be in the world because they have to be made or they have to be housed or accommodated or whatever the case is, and the determining factors of how many of those things can be made are not that there is a decision to make them, but rather like the raw materials that go into them and, and so on and so forth.
You have
so
to buy like
avocado,
you have to make the paint, you know, like
yeah, exactly.
You have to make the pigment.
We don't have cadmium paint anymore, so we can't have cadmium.
Yeah, like there's a limited number of pigments you can use to like finish car exteriors and fridges, and part of the reason why it feels like different historical moments have different color palettes is because, you know, those things are used on a variety of appliances, right? Like you can use the same pigments to do the exterior of a car and a toaster oven and a refrigerator. I mean, I think a lot of people point out that like things have gotten much more monochromatic. Like there's like these kind of like, especially for cars, like you see like there's like all these colors and then they go, and it's like gray, white, black.
Well, and not to mention the puttyification that Jonah and
beige
Biplane pointed out a couple of years ago. Yeah, exactly. Well, also that like taking the flake out of it and making it flat and you know, sort of matte.
Yeah, things being more matte. I mean, these are all like small decisions and they create different aesthetics in the world, but you know, there's pretty big manufacturers in like China who are like, we're gonna make these like specific things and not these things because we only have so much manufacturing capacity at our factory. Like there's like material limits.
To that end, have you? I mean, clearly you're familiar with like the theoretical condition involved. Have you ever gotten over into the spaces where stuff is made in the modern world?
I have not.
How that stuff works. Because I haven't either, and I'm fascinated by it.
I have friends. Most of my like kind of interaction with this is friends who work in fashion who have to go visit factories.
Sure.
Which is funny because I think a lot of people would think you didn't have to do this, but you really do because you're placing these large orders with people you don't really know, and you need to go make sure that like they're correctly executing the designs and that they're not ripping you off. You know, you don't have a lot of.
Well, or even just like we all collectively get better service when we're able to personify the relationship. So it's like you go over and you want to be able to say, oh, I was there and I met Elizabeth and she was awesome. Or I met, you know, Jorge and he was awesome. Can we make sure that she or he or they or whomever works on it? And even if that doesn't happen, it's a signal to the person on the other side of the transaction that
that you're paying attention
and that you care about.
That you're not just sending a wire transfer and you're gonna forget about it maybe, so they don't really need to prioritize it.
Send me a wire transfer by all means, but like I'm gonna pay attention to that. Okay, so then that it sort of brings us around to the question of inputs, and you know, ostensibly this show is a companion to the newsletter that I publish on Thursdays, which is 100 plus links of stuff that I just, you know, my literal version of pattern recognition. And what I often ask guests is, what are the stories that jumped out at you today? I want to ask you a slightly different question because while I want to hear what jumped out at you, if you want to get into it, I also am just interested, like, as I wrote yesterday, my good friend and I think our mutual acquaintance anyway, Kevin Kuzatsu, described you as having an observatory-sized lens on the world in a text to me. And what that makes me wonder immediately is like, what are the sources that you're using as your inputs?
It's really like mostly X. It's like 90% X, 10% Substack, and then like marginal amount of stuff. I mean, X is just a really good clearinghouse of stuff, you know, because people, even though links are kind of downranked in the algorithm now, people post a lot of stuff. And I do think part of the reason why people hate that Elon bought it is that it served this kind of agenda setting function for the broader media before he bought it. I think some people thought maybe that would fall away because he changed how it worked in a lot of different ways, but I don't think it really did, because I think you need that kind of like raucous town square. It's like a mix of like, you know, bots run by intelligence agencies and like anonymous shit posters and people who have like kind of sincere philosophical commitments and activists and government figures and celebrities and on and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what I need on X is a fucking better filter, because my signal to noise ratio on there is way out of whack. It's not worth the time I spend on it. Yeah, just because I don't have a good. I was never a Twitter person, and so I never fine-tuned my sources or inputs to a place where they actually became valuable. It's just
I mean, I also have a couple of friends that I just send endless links to, and they send endless links to me, and most of them are from X. But they're not like just tweets. They're like, screenshots of media stories and yada yada yada. And so that also kind of like, I mean, we're both like mutually tolerant of like having that text chain that's just not words, just links going back and forth. But also like the things that stick or become like small conversations also register more with me. I mean, the thing that jumped out to me today was, and I don't know if this is true or not. I saw like literally a screenshot of a story, so I'm like being the person who just reads headlines. That everyone is like, I hate that people do this and then you do it yourself. But it was I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was basically like Trump saying like, anyone who disagrees with Musk is out of the cabinet. Which I found, this is kind of what I've been following pretty closely, is the decline of Musk's public favorability. And I mean, he's just gotten so silly. It's not even like crazy. It's like him at CPAC with the sunglasses and the Mr. T chains and a chainsaw given him by, Milei, the kind of libertarian president of Argentina. But also you look at the polling numbers, Trump started out pretty good, and it's been crashing. And it's mostly because of like Musk is like, I think down like an extra 10 points or something in favorability. I mean, obviously these things are like always kind of foggy, but I always kind of level set polling against like how I feel people are talking about things. And I think like the Doge one, I mean, I think the federal bureaucracy needs to be, reformed. I'm a little skeptical about this like slash and burn method though. It's kind of funny because there's actually a term for this. It's called the Washington Monument Syndrome, which is that when there's budget cuts, the bureaucracy tends to cut the things that the public likes most first, so that people start getting upset about it and they stop cutting their budget. So they'll like close the national parks, or you can't go up the Washington Monument today because we had our budget cut. But they actually like went those things, and to me it's a little confusing because I kind of presume that there's not that many people that work for the national parks. Lots of people go to them and pay entrance fees, so I presume those people are like budget positive, most likely, compared to some positions in the federal government.
But I mean,
and people really like these people. People love the parks. Like, no one hates national parks.
That's the whole thing that seems so strange to me. It's like you're cutting the operational layer out of this the services in which we massively invest. It's like if you cut 25% of federal employees, fine, you lose 1% of the operating budget. Now there's 25% less people to operate the other 99% of stuff. Like,
well, also again, to go back to upstate New York, right? Like, upstate New York got body slammed by NAFTA and deindustrialization and outsourcing, and all of that manufacturing, economic activity just went over to public sector activity. So I'm a little skeptical about what the, second order effects of this are going to be, because like the place I grew up, it's all public sector employment in one way or another. I mean, yes, there's like a lab that makes new, grape and apple varietals that's run by Cornell, but that's, running partially on federal grants. Like the universities are all.
When you say you're skeptical about the second order effects, you just mean like,
I just think it's going to be bad for a lot of small town and Midwestern America, because I think those places have become much more dependent on public sector employment, because there's, so when Trump and Elon say we want these people to work in the private sector, I'm kind of like, well, are there jobs there for these people? Like, it's kind of like a third of the workforce is in the public sector.
Right. Well,
and most of those things, even if they're state and local level, are running off of, federal block grants and things like that.
Right. Well, and what? How are you supposed to get the public sector to invest, or the private sector to invest in those areas when there are so many environmental drawbacks? And by that I don't mean like green energy drawbacks. I mean, like, it's not very nice.
I mean, I'll be honest. I have a personal dog in this fight. Like, my sister just graduated from ESF and like lost her job like a week before. So ESF is like the public sector part of SUNY. And she was going to do like a soil conservation job. And to me, like I said, I have a lot of skepticism about a lot of the federal bureaucracy. And I think some of the stuff coming out is quite damning and why this is happening. But at the same time, like, we're not going to do soil conservation. Like, this is kind of like, this is a program that was created after the Dust Bowl. So it's a classic, like, tragedy of the commons issue, like, where it's like, how do you coordinate to make sure that individuals aren't following market forces that actually make the general situation very bad, where everyone's depleting the soil at the same time, because the market's not coordinating to make sure that we're conserving the soil.
Well, you would also think I was going to make a joke about how Grapes of Wrath wasn't distributed in South Africa because it's too much of the fodder for the proletariat rising up. But ironically, the soil thing in particular, you would think, given all of the memes around Idiocracy was a documentary.
Yeah, exactly.
That soil would be the one thing you'd
Brondo,
let's
plants need.
It's what plants crave.
Oh, it's what plants crave. Yeah, they crave electrolytes.
They don't even crave electrolytes.
Salting the earth.
They crave Brondo.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me though is just like, I don't know. I'm skeptical that the federal labor force is really the big part of the debt problem.
Yeah.
I'm sympathetic to the idea that there are people in the federal bureaucracy who have maybe gone a step too far in, being part of the resistance, because it's like, well, like, what are you supposed to do if there's like a layer of the bureaucracy that's just trying to stymie the presidency? And they're very explicit about how they're like trying to like prevent, the person who was elected from doing what he was elected to do. Like, that's a problem. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know if there's savings there. There was another thing that came out yesterday about like the Treasury Secretary saying like, yeah, the economy was actually crap because there was no private sector growth. It was all kind of like federal employment propping up the growth numbers. That's probably a problem too. But at the same time, I'm like,
though?
That's what the Secretary of the Treasury said yesterday. I mean, to me, the private sector didn't feel very great the last couple of years.
Sure.
I mean, I know I'm like kind of like the first to get cut from a budget. I think, trend forecasters and kind of cultural consultants are definitely a business luxury, right? Like, that's one of these things where you can do without it for a couple of years if you're trying to like belt
one
tighten.
Way, I could see how that would be the case. I mean, seen another way, it's almost like
I just think it's like it's small. It's not. I'm not cheap, but it's not hugely expensive. It's not an agency fee,
Right.
So when you're snipping around the edges, whatever. But so I don't think the economy was great the last couple of years. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of like a little skeptical that this is going to go their way. Like, there's two problems. One is like a lot of your constituents live in these deindustrialized areas that are dependent on public sector employment because of the last libertarian round of like bad ideas. Which was like,
where do you locate that?
NAFTA and free trade and outsourcing.
So
and this was all
Bill
like
Clinton 94.
Yeah, and we'll retrain them, but like, we'll retrain all these workers, and that didn't happen, and it was a disaster. And I think we're still dealing with the kind of social fallout of like letting all those economies just implode. And then on the other side, I actually feel like I think when people fire bureaucracies, it tends to like go badly, right? Like, this is the classic invasion of Iraq versus invasion of Japan and Germany after World War II, and we know which model worked better. It was the one where they didn't fire the bureaucracy for ideological reasons; they just put different people at the top of it. And in Iraq, they famously fired all of the people who were in the Ba'ath Party, that was Saddam's party, and then those are the people who like started all the terrorist stories. It was a huge disaster. So I'm a little like, the historical rhyming here seems unwise.
Yeah, look, my wife is English, and we've had conversations with her family recently, like in the last basically the holiday period, where they finally are like, yeah, Brexit, which we all voted for, was a bad idea.
Yeah,
and you think about all of these examples that to indicate, the wholesale abandonment of a structure is a mistake.
There wasn't a plan. That was the
that's
problem.
what I mean.
I think there could have been a version of Brexit that wasn't a big fuck up, but when no one even knew what it meant to vote for it. Like, it's like, well, what does leaving the EU mean? Because it's a bit nebulous.
It meant that honest English plumbers are going to have jobs and not have to compete with the Polish plumbers anymore. And you're just like, wait, there aren't any of those. Like, the reason these people came in was to fill a labor, like
I mean, they're the big. I mean, obviously, I'm Irish. My background's Irish, so from my name.
I did ask you. I'm curious if Monahan was spelled any or
but I mean, I think that was the big problem. There was like the Good Friday Agreement, which ended like the Troubles, was only possible because of the EU, because they're like, oh well, now we don't need this border. We can have this kind of ambiguous situation where the Republic treats all the people born on the island of Ireland as Irish, but part are also British, and we don't really have to like resolve this. And now it seems like basically they had to put a border around Northern Ireland, which is technically part of the UK. A lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of second order effects with, like you said, just you don't have a plan. I mean, a lot of this is just like kind of, it's harder to operate in an era where everything's super complex. But I'm just generally interested in, because I wrote something about this, about the counter elite, and I think like right after the election, and Silicon Valley is kind of like the epicenter of that. And my position still is like, there's definitely like, we're in a anti-incumbent reform era in the United States, obviously, which is kind of why my preference isn't to talk too much about politics, but it's kind of hard to avoid it because it's cultural in nature as well. But they're kind of getting an audition, and I genuinely do not think people voted for like libertarianism, right? And Silicon Valley just seems like they just can't get off that drug, I'm just like,
see the new Andreessen Horowitz logo. Like, could you have ripped that from?
I mean, I thought it was cool looking, but I just don't. I think we're at the end of the libertarianism era. They seem to not think that, and I think there's like some motivated reasoning there, because it serves their personal and business interests. But my point to like get to it before I go on too many tangents is just like, but if their first like opening volley is like, and we got rid of 30% of the jobs in America, and now we're coming for another 20% with AI. I don't think they're gonna win. They're not gonna be the ones who get to design the next era of the United States. Because it's just gonna be so. It just seems like it's potentially so socially dysfunctional. I don't necessarily know what the answer is to some of these questions, but I just do know that like we live in a democracy kind of, and the midterms are coming, and if the people who voted for mass deportations get their economies crashed instead, they're gonna vote for the Democrats, or they're just not gonna vote at all, and you guys are all gonna end up impeached anyways.
Right.
And like the whole like Musk being like, I feel like I might have gone to jail if we didn't win, is maybe true. Ultimately, the federal government is a lot more powerful than any person in business by just orders of magnitude in terms of, they have the largest military in the world and the largest budget in the world. So I'm like, that's kind of a real worry, because that is something that happens when you become so stupendously unpopular. You end up being the scapegoat. But yeah, I don't know, because I went on Wisdom with Crowds with like the podcast a couple days ago, and I said kind of the same thing, because I was like, well, I think it's kind of up for grabs, because it's really who can deliver a better quality of life. It's not this ideological. Both sides just seem like they're. I mean, I think this is why Trump had such an appeal, was people didn't think he was that ideological, actually.
Right. Yeah.
And when you look at all his positions, they don't sort into one bucket cleanly. And that's probably partially because he took a lot of positions that both the Republican and the Democratic Party didn't like, and he used to be a Democrat who's now in charge of the Republican Party. So, it's a real mixed bag.
Right. Well,
in terms
not
of
to
positions.
mention he's had such a long relationship with the morally ambiguous / the pop cultural. It's ironically around the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live, I got a link to the 15th anniversary of Saturday Night Live, which you're probably slightly too young to remember, but was a real lodestone moment for me, right? When as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old when it came on, and Chevy Chase does the opening monologue, and it's the joke that's building up to the fall, but he trips and spills his popcorn on Donald Trump in the audience, and you're just like, fuck, 1990, this guy was interwoven into the
he was in Home Alone too.
Well, I mean, but that's a different. I mean, yes, but that's he's an industrialist character there.
Yeah.
In Saturday Night Live, he's like, I'm in on the joke. I'm famous for famous sake, and I'm in on the joke, and so it becomes pretty easy to identify.
People who dislike him, if you can pause that, he is very funny. He's doing stand up most of the time when he's speaking.
Oh my God, I can't believe
it's true though. So I'm interested to see how this shakes out, because Silicon Valley has gotten a bad rap, and to me, this also feels like potentially like the nail in the coffin for them. I could be wrong. This could work really well. I'm not an economist. Elon does have a track record of running businesses really well. I just am not sure if this is it's one thing to slash and burn Twitter, because there's a lot of market elasticity for those extra 6,000 people. It's another thing to slash and burn 2 or 3 million jobs or something.
Right. Well, and the soil conservationists in upstate New York.
And also it's a bunch of stuff that people like,
Yeah, for sure.
Sure, sue United Healthcare for defrauding taxpayers through Medicare fraud. That's super popular. People hate health insurance companies.
Yeah,
but I don't know if firing the park rangers. This also doesn't. It seems like today they were talking about how they got rid of some. There are too many Adobe Photoshop licenses being used at this point. So they're tweeting about I'm like, how much is this saving? Get rid of them. I mean, whatever, but this just doesn't seem like the spike the football moment that you think it is.
Smoke. Yeah, fucking smoke. I mean, it presumes that people know what Adobe Photoshop licenses are, which is just
bananas. There's a lot. I've gone through periods where I've accidentally had 2 licenses and been wasting money. I don't know. People are sloppy, that's for sure. Anyways,
I'm a subscriber to Peacock. I'll tell you about that, right? So okay, so Sean, I wanted to here's one question. You describe yourself as a writer, and you talked about writing something the other day. My buddy, who you may know, Sam Valenti, who does Ghostly. So Sam texted me yesterday apropos of nothing, and he's just like, your conversations on this show on SIC Talks should go into a book that marketers should read, and here's who should publish it, and here's the thesis of it, and so on and so forth. And I thought that was a very generous and flattering suggestion by Sam. I don't think it's true, but I do, and I'm not just being self-effacing. I think there's a lot of
books in the world.
Well, there's that, but then
and a lot of stuff to read.
There are many, and there are many more sort of salient sources, I think, than I am. You certainly fall for me into that category, and I wonder to what extent writing as a vocation is a thing that you think about from the standpoint of books and the form factors that we really think about. Are you working on anything like that?
I mean, yeah, I've been working on a book. This is like, famous last words. You announce it and then you never do it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I like writing. I think the funny thing is I have to kind of take years where I focus on writing more and years where I focus on consulting more. And some of that's because like you'll have a really productive year and then the next year you have less, and I'm using year like roughly. And then you'll have like a year where you have less to say because you produced a lot. And I think that's kind of good and has helped me prevent burnout. It's kind of a luxury to have two different modes of working. But
does Substack mitigate that effect? Does it like bring the circles of the Venn diagram closer together?
No, I just think the writing half of my brain and the strategy half of my brain, which is what the consulting mostly boils down to, do not work well together.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Well, part of it's just like when you have a client and they're paying you a retainer, you have to be available. But when you're writing, you have to be unavailable. So to me, there's like a real logistical issue here.
Yeah, sure.
That like you need long stretches of time that are relatively bored and unproductive. And I know some people can do this where they can run around and then at the end of the day, they can like, write for 2 hours and get something out. That's not me.
Yeah.
Also, I just know that the good ideas come from like being pretty lazy. Yeah, I mean, I think being lazy can be productive.
Yeah, of course.
I think a lot of the reason why maybe I can have like more insights per capita or something is because I don't have like a traditional affiliation, as you said.
Yeah.
Like having a 9-to-5 job that you're accountable for and then trying to write and think about the world is... Someone asked me about this recently on the Substack and I was like, because they were basically saying like, well, I need to write to promote my career, right? Like people are saying like you have to have a side hustle. And I mean, that's one, why people burn out. And two, like what I said was like, I mean, maybe probably like really set really narrow parameters. Like maybe, right? Like one cool thing a year. That can be enough. Because it's like when you're on the content treadmill and you're, 24/7 available for a 9-to-5, it's too much. Like I don't think you get the best quality out of either. And like I said, some people can do it. I think those people are usually working maybe in more of like a journalistic mode though.
Yeah.
Where like,
well,
okay, I have this subject,
muscle, right?
I researched, because it's like one thing to be like, I have this subject, I researched it. Now I'm going to write 800 words on it. I think the way I work is different because I'm trying to come up with ideas, not to like toot my own horn, but it's harder to have like an idea than it is to like have a thing that you're going to write about, where there's like a who, what, where, when, why. And I mean, if anything, sometimes people criticize my writing for like not having enough of the details of what I'm talking about and being too conceptual or idea focused. Which I think if you don't get the references can be hard, but I don't know. You have to pick a lane, because it's for some people not having that kind of journalistic lens is difficult because they don't know what you're talking about. For other people who do know what you're talking about, it can be incredibly boring to have me explain these things that they know about very well, and just getting into the nitty gritty of it. Well, one, it like saps some of the magic out of it, and two, they just turn off because they don't want to read about things they already know.
All right. Well, listen, you pointed out to me that you have a meeting. I have a meeting.
Yeah.
So this is a good point for us to stop. But Sean, this has been really fun. And
all right,
really
great chatting, Ben.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Everybody, this has been SIC Talks number 96 with Sean Monahan. Sean, again, is at 8ball, the number 8, ball.substack.com. Highly, highly recommended that you subscribe. And not only that you do that, but you get the paid version, as I do, because it's fucking great. Sean,
well, thank you, man.
Thank you very much for being here. We
all
really
right.
appreciate it.
Well, have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.